Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. So in today's video, I'm looking at the 2026 Senate elections map, and just a few days ago, or about a week ago now, I did my prediction for the month of May for the US Senate map. It's been about a month since I did this on the Senate map last time, but I'm going to go through every single Senate race and look at the most recent poll or polling average in the state, look at all the most recent polling averages. If there is no polling average, I'll do the most recent poll. If there's no polling at all, I'm going to defer to the prediction rankings if there are any, and then if there aren't any prediction rankings, I'll then use my own personal predictions. So that's just the line of thinking on this one. So with that said, let's start out first. We're going to go west to east. We're going to start with the state of Oregon. Oregon, as expected, a Democratic state, is going to be very safe. Democratic incumbent Jeff Merkley. On the Democratic side, a bunch of Republicans are running. On the Republican side, there's currently no polling data yet for this race, but it's listed as safe for the Democrats across the board. So no surprise, Oregon goes into the safe Democratic category. We're going to do next the state of Idaho, here. This is going to be also likely a very safe Republican state. Republican incumbent Jim Risch is running in this race. Democratic side, 3 Democrats are running in this race. There is a Libertarian candidate running as well in Matt Losby, and there's also an independent candidate, Todd Achilles, as well, and Natalie Fleming. After this race, it's listed as solid Republican from all the prediction rankings. For Jim Risch versus Todd Achilles in public policy polling, it shows roughly about a 14-point race from their March poll. This is a Democratic pollster, but with Risch versus Achilles as the matchup, that's the only poll in the race. We're just going to go off of this one, and we're going to put Idaho into the likely Republican category just to use that poll that we have in this video. Okay, so with that, now we have one for the Democrats, one for the Republicans. We're going to go to neighboring Montana, where Montana, similar to Idaho, but a little bit more of a competitive race is happening here. The Republican incumbent, Steve Daines, is not running for re-election. His chosen appointed candidate, Kurt Alme, is the respective leader at this current point in time and will be the Republican nominee when everything is said and done. On the Democratic side, there are a bunch of Democratic candidates running. The most notable name is Riley Neal, the former state representative. But what makes this race very intriguing is the third-party candidate, Seth Bodnar, who is the former president of the University of Montana. He's been endorsed by the former Democratic Senator Jon Tester as the person that can make this race most competitive. He's also done a significant job of raising roughly about $1.4 million, almost 1.3 if you want to be specific, in this race. So if it could get down to a 1v1 matchup of Alme versus Bodnar, this race could get actually very competitive. The prediction rankings currently reflect this as well, likely Republican across the board, except for Cook Politico, who has it as solid. For the hypothetical polling, for Daines versus Neal versus Bodnar, showing what the polls looked like before Daines dropped out. Daines versus Bodnar's Democrat was a 14-point lead. Daines versus Neal versus Bodnar for the three-way race, it was roughly about over a 25-point lead. And the head-to-head of Daines versus Bodnar, it was a likely Republican lead. So even though Daines is no longer in the race, we're going to go with the rankings here, which have it as likely Republican, which honestly works out because it was going to be likely Republican based on the predictions in the poll anyway. So Montana goes in likely Republican. Also, in case I haven't been clear, other rankings I'm using the political margin rankings of 15 and over being safe, 15 to 5 being likely, 5 to 1 being lean, and 1 and under being toss-up, just to be clear. So now we're going to go to the state of Wyoming. Wyoming is going to be also a very likely safe Republican Senate seat. There is a retiring incumbent, the U.S. Representative Harriet Hagman of the U.S. Representative District at Large for Wyoming is running in this race. She already has the endorsement of President Trump and the 2 senators, John Barrasso and Cynthia Lummis, in this race. No surprise there, she'll be the Republican candidate. James Byrd, the Democrat, is seen as the only candidate running in this race right now. Solid Republican from all the rankings, though. This one goes into safe Republican, as is expected. Next, we can take a look at the Senate race in the state of Colorado. Colorado used to be a more competitive state at the presidential and Senate level, and even governor level. It's become a lot more Democratic since then. The U.S. incumbent Senator John Hickenlooper is likely going to win his Democratic primary against State Senator Julie Gonzalez. On the Republican side, Mark Baisley, the state senator, is the presumptive Republican nominee. For the general election, though, it's all Democrat across the board with no current polling data. Not really a surprise, Colorado goes into the safe Democratic category. New Mexico is a state that usually the Democrats are favored in, but would be a likely Democratic state. This time around, though, the Democrats should have a much easier time in this race. The U.S. incumbent Senator Ben Ray Lujan is going to be the Democratic candidate once again. On the Republican side, though, there is one Republican write-in candidate declared. The Republicans did fail to have a prospective candidate until March 17th. And then Marker must receive 2,351 write-in votes in the primary to advance to the general election. So the Republicans do not have a surefire candidate on the ballot like they usually would in this race, and that has led to this race being listed as safe for the Democrats. So with that, New Mexico, on par with Colorado and Oregon, goes into the safe Democratic category in a state that would otherwise be decently competitive. I'm going to hold off on Alaska for now because I think Alaska could be one of those battleground states that are going to decide the Senate map, and I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth towards the later part of the video. Next, we're going to go to a state that should not be too competitive in the state of South Dakota. This is Republican incumbent Mike Rounds. On the Democratic side, only Democratic candidate is Julian Boudin, and that is the likely Democratic candidate. Independent Brian Bangs, a U.S. Navy and Air Force veteran, is running this race as well. The predictions are all solid Republican. For Mike Rounds versus Julian Boudin from November 2025 from the Democratic pollster Public Policy Polling shows Rounds leading 52-30, roughly about a 22-point lead. For Rounds versus Brian Banks from that same poll did show it more competitive at roughly around a 13-point lead in that one. So if sort of similar to Montana, if the Democratic candidate drops out and it becomes a race of the Republican versus independent, it shows more of a possibility of being competitive, but when it's just the Republican versus Democrat, looks to be a safe race. So with this one, we're going to put South Dakota into the safe Republican category. Not really too much of a surprise there. Though I think the clicker's having a little trouble. But yeah, safe Republican in South Dakota, not too surprised. Now we have two Midwestern states coming up here in Nebraska and Kansas, both of which may be more competitive this time around than they have been in past few elections. Now Nebraska, if you've been following the channel, you've been hearing me talk about Nebraska a lot. It's competitive. Incumbent U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts is facing off against independent candidate Dan Osborne, and that's why this race is competitive. There are two Democrats running in this race, but Cindy Burbank has floated a possibility of dropping out of the race in the general election and giving Dan Osborne essentially a straight chance at defeating Pete Ricketts. If that is the case, and it becomes a 1v1 matchup of Ricketts versus Osborne, that gives the quote-unquote Democrats the best chance of winning that race. The rankings are likely Republican from all the prediction websites except for race to the White House, and the polling shows thus far a very, very close race. The most recent poll from Democratic pollster Impact Research, which is sponsored by Dan Osborne's campaign, a 1-point race. Ricketts at 48, Osborne at 47, 5% undecided. So a very, very close race. Again, no polling average. And this one's the most recent poll. We're going to give Nebraska to the Republican incumbent, but we're only going to do it by tilt Republican, as it is only a 1-point lead as of right now. So Nebraska is a very close Senate race to keep an eye out for. And like we saw in the 2024 Senate race in Nebraska, where we pull up the 2024 map, Deb Fischer, the Republican incumbent, beat Dan Osborne by about 6.7%. If the Democrats are having a very strong midterm election like they're supposed to, and Dan Osborne is running at least on par to the 2024 results, given the shift of the country from 2024 to 2026, it's possible this 1-point margin could actually end up happening if the Democrats make on those gains, and Osborne, being an independent in Nebraska, can do that as well. So Nebraska is a very interesting Senate race to keep an eye out for. Next, we're going to go to the state of Kansas, where Kansas was not a Republican Senate race that looked to be too competitive, but then a recent candidate jumping in has made it more competitive. Roger Marshall, the incumbent U.S. Senator, he has the endorsement of Donald Trump. On the Democratic side, there are several candidates running. The most notable Democrat in the race is Adam Hamilton, who is a pastor who initially formed an exploratory committee as an independent, but has recently announced a run as a Democrat. He is going to make this race very interesting. For inside elections, listed as solid Republican across the board from back in January. Race to the White House, though, as of April 17th, has it as likely R. Now, for Roger Marshall versus Adam Hamilton, comes from Tavern Research, a Democratic pollster from January, showed it roughly about an 8-point race. Marshall versus Noah Taylor, had it about a 10-point race. Roger Marshall versus Patrick Schmidt, around a 10-point race. But when it was Marshall versus Hamilton running as an independent, Hamilton was actually leading by 2 points. Now, this could just be an internal shock poll and probably won't end up being close to what the actual margin is, because now that he's running as a Democrat and not a Republican. Still, Kansas starts out, though, based on the most recent poll, in likely Republican now that Hamilton is running in this race. So it's going to be interesting to see how Kansas ultimately shakes out when everything is said and done. Next, we're going to go to the state of Oklahoma, which, again, this should not be too much of a surprise here. Oklahoma should be a very safe Republican state. The Republican incumbent, Mark Wayne Mullen, is not running in this race, as he is now serving in President Trump's administration, but U.S. Representative Kevin Hern is seen as the likely Republican nominee in this race. He already has the endorsement of President Trump and several U.S. senators as well. So we can expect Kevin Hern will be the Republican candidate. Several Democrats are running in this race as well. No polling data yet for the general election, but solid Republican across the board. Again, not really a surprise here. Oklahoma goes as safe Republican. The state of Texas, sort of similar to Alaska, I might hold off on talking about just a little bit. Nebraska, the poll showed it being very close, but Texas and Alaska are kind of more talked about as being really popular toss-ups right now, so I do want to hold off on Texas just for a little bit. Okay, so next we're going to go to the state of Louisiana. Louisiana is an interesting race because it's not going to be too competitive at the general election side, but the Republican primary is very competitive. The U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, more of a vocal anti-Trump Republican senators of the Republican senators in Congress, is getting primary challenge from Republican John Fleming and Republican Representative Julia Letlow, who Letlow already has the endorsement of President Trump. Cassidy does have the endorsement of two of the top senators in the Republican side on John Thune and Tim Scott, but with Letlow having the endorsement of Trump, the early polling data has shown Letlow and John Fleming leading Bill Cassidy in the 270 to win polling average. In the race to the White House average, Bill Cassidy is leading Letlow and Fleming, but the most recent poll from Emerson College, which came out April 24th through 26th, so kind of a recent poll, showed Letlow and Fleming leading over Cassidy. Now, the way it works in Louisiana is the winning candidate must break 50% of the vote. If not, it heads to a runoff election where it would be a 1v1 matchup. And it's looking like it's possible we may have a runoff of Fleming versus Letlow, with Bill Cassidy not even making it to the runoff election. So that's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. There are 3 Democrats running in this race. There is third-party candidates as well. A America Party candidate, Jamie Kim LaBranch, is a write-in candidate as well. But for the general election, no surprise here. Solid Republican across the board. We can put Louisiana into the safe Republican category. Now we can look at the state of Arkansas. Arkansas, again, this is a state that will probably end up being safe Republican and should not really be too much of a surprise when everything is said and done. This is Republican incumbent Senator Tom Cotton. On the Democratic side, the nominee for the Democrats is Haley Schaffner. As for the other candidates in the race, there is a Libertarian candidate as well, and Jeff Wadlin, but overall listed as safe Republican across the board between Cotton versus Haley Schaffner. The most recent poll has Cotton at 58, Schaffner at 36, so overall Cotton's leading in this Republican Gray House poll, which is sponsored by American One Policies, a Republican I believe organization, and Cotton is leading by roughly about 22 points. So no surprise, Arkansas goes into the safe Republican category for this race. This gets the Republicans up to about 40 Senate seats without factoring in Alaska or Texas yet, but Nebraska and Kansas, Montana and Idaho all under 15 points. Nebraska had only up 1 point in the most recent poll. Definitely a very important one to watch for. Iowa, kind of like with Texas and Alaska, I'm going to circle back on. Minnesota is going to be interesting. It shouldn't be too competitive in this election environment. The Democratic incumbent Tina Smith is retiring. 2 Democrats are fighting in the primary, and Peggy Flanagan and Angie Craig. I would say this is where the more competitive matchup ends up being. On the Republican side, there are a few candidates in the race as well. I would say Michelle Tafoya likely has a lead as of right now in this race. The only poll from January shows Tafoya leading by quite a bit. Likely Democrat across the board for the prediction rankings. The most recent poll for Craig versus Tafoya is a 7-point lead, 47-40. Flanagan versus Tafoya is a 6-point lead, 47-41 from Emerson College. Both of those rankings would fall under likely Democrat, so Minnesota would start out as likely Democrat right now as well. And actually, you know what? I decided to change my mind. We're going to now go to the state of Iowa and get Iowa out of the way, because Iowa is quickly becoming more competitive, and I was going to hold off on it, but let's just get it out of the way while we're here. The Republican incumbent Joni Ernst is not running again, but U.S. Representative Ashley Hinson of the 2nd District in Iowa is running in this race and essentially has his Republican primary on lock. The Democratic primary, however, though, is very competitive, with 2 Democrats, Josh Turek and Zach Walz, fighting it out in that primary. The polling on this one, the most recent poll from FM3 Research, a Democratic pollster which supports Josh Turek, shows Turek leading 48-28 over Walz, though every prior poll, including the Bedrock polling poll from March, shows Walz leading over Josh Turek 56-38. So we're going to have to wait and see how this Democratic primary ultimately shakes out. That most recent poll for Turek leading Walz by quite a bit seems to be the only one showing that right now, but we'll have to wait and see how it all goes. After this race, the most prediction rankings have it as likely Republican across the board, except for Race to the White House, who has it as a toss-up. Hinson versus Josh Turek in the most recent poll is actually 46-45, a tilt Democratic win. And Hinson versus Zach Walz is 46-42. That would be a lean Democratic win in the most recent poll from Echelon Insights, which is a Republican-affiliated pollster. So though there's no polling average here, the most recent poll is actually the Democrat either up 1 or up 2, which is very, very interesting. It depends which Democratic candidate you choose here. Turek, the most recent poll, is up by 1. Walz, the consensus leader, has been up by 2 here. So we're going to go with the most recent poll just because we're going with the most recent averages in polls in this one. So we're going to say it's Turek versus Hinson, where it's a 1-point lead. So Iowa on this Senate map, despite being a state that's usually thought of as a very likely state, based on the most recent poll, would actually be likely Democrat, which is very, very, very interesting. And since I came back on my word about Iowa, we're going to look at Texas and Alaska as well. Just kind of going on the fly here, we'll take a look first at Texas. This is Republican incumbent Senator John Cornyn, who, as of the day I'm recording this video, the primary is still not shaken out yet for the runoff between Cornyn and Paxton. The polling has been very close. The most recent poll, which just came out a few days ago from the University of Houston, shows Paxton leading Cornyn 48-45 with 7% undecided. So still very, very close in this runoff. We'll have to wait and see how it all goes. On the Democratic side, we know that the Democratic nominee in this race is James Tallarico. He won the primary against Jasmine Crockett. Remember doing a live stream for that primary as well. As for the general election, it's listed as likely Republican across the board in the prediction rankings, except for Race to the White House, but the polling has shown it to be very competitive. For Cornyn versus Tallarico, the most recent poll from Texas Opinion Research shows Tallarico up 44-41 with 11% undecided. In that same poll, 46-41 for Tallarico versus Paxton, a 5-point lead in that race. So the early polling thus far, despite it being more of a red state, shows Tallarico with a very large lead right now over the Republicans in a usually red seat. Now, ultimately, I don't think it's going to end up being a Democratic win, and if it is, it certainly won't be by 5 points. But the current polling data, the most recent poll for Paxton, who's leading the primary, is a 5-point lead for Tallarico. Also, Tallarico's raised over $40 million, spent $30 million already. Very significant funding in this race. So based on that, Texas with James Tallarico in the most recent poll would technically be 5 points, would be likely Democratic on this map. Now we can go to the state of Alaska as well. Alaska, this is the Republican incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. He is running for re-election, but he is facing a very tough Democratic opponent in former U.S. Representative Mary Peltola. This is going to be the matchup for the general election, and it is a very close one. Lean Republican from 3 of the top rankings, toss up from Race to the White House, but the polling average, we finally have a Senate race with the polling average, shows it at Peltola plus 4.9. 49.3 for Peltola, 44.4 for Dan Sullivan. The most recent Alaska Survey research poll from a few weeks ago shows Peltola leading over Dan Sullivan by about 6% in both of these polling matchups here. So at 4.9%, we can put Alaska into the lean Democratic category by 0.1%, just literally 0.1% higher, it'd be likely Democrat. But now, according to the map, based on the most recent polling averages and most recent polls, we have blue Alaska, blue Texas, blue Iowa, nearly blue Nebraska, and more competitive elections in Kansas, Idaho, and Montana. Certainly not what the Senate map looked like at the start of this election cycle following the 2024 elections. Next, we can go to the state of Illinois while we are over here. Illinois, this is going to be a state that unsurprisingly should be safe for the Democrats, with Democrat Juliana Stratton, the lieutenant governor, winning the Democratic primary. On the Republican side, Don Tracy, the Republican, won that primary in that race. As for the general, though, no surprise here. Solid Democrat, no polling as of yet, but Illinois goes into the safe Democratic category. Next, we're going to go down to the state of Mississippi, which Mississippi, despite being a very red state, has shown some signs in the past with Cindy Hyde-Smith, the U.S. Senator, of potentially being competitive. Hyde-Smith is up again in this race, and she'll be facing off against the Democrat Scott Cullum as the Democrat candidate. As for third-party candidates, Ty Pinkins, an independent, is running in this race as well. It's listed as solid Republican by most likely Republican from race to the White House, but for the most recent poll, Cindy Hyde-Smith versus Scott Cullum versus Ty Pinkins from Impact Research, it shows a very close race. 42 for Hyde-Smith, Cullum at 39, Pinkins at 6%, including in the head-to-head matchup for Hyde-Smith and Cullum, 47-44, with 9% undecided. So Mississippi, based on these margins, goes Republican, but by 3% it actually goes into the lean Republican category. So it's a very interesting map shaping up here. One certainly not like what most of the predictions are currently showing here. Part of it could just be also we're very early in the cycle. There hasn't been a lot of polling done, but definitely very interesting map taking shape thus far. We can now look at the state of Alabama right next door to Mississippi. This was, I do believe, Republican incumbent U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville, who is now running for governor, so it's an open race. The Republican primary is still very competitive between Steve Marshall, Barry Moore, and all the candidates in that race. It shows a very close race. The most recent poll from the Terrence Group, which is a Republican-affiliated pollster who supports Marshall, shows Marshall down by about 1 point, Moore up by 1. As for the Democratic side, 4 Democrats are currently in this race, including Kyle Sweetser, who was a 2024 Democratic National Convention speaker. So we'll have to wait and see for that primary to shake out as well. Solid Republican, though, for all the rankings across the board. Not really too much of a surprise in Alabama. Alabama will go safe for the Republicans. Next, we can look at the state of Tennessee. We'll go north here. Tennessee, I do believe this is Republican incumbent U.S. Senator Bill Hagerty. He's up for re-election. He's running again. He has the endorsement of President Trump already. 4 Democrats are running in this race, including Marquita Bradshaw and Maria Brewer. We'll have to wait and see how that primary goes, but solid Republican across the board here. Again, not really any surprise here. Tennessee goes safe for the Republicans. Next, we can take a look at the state of Kentucky, where President Trump just made an endorsement in this Republican primary. This is Mitch McConnell's Senate seat. Andy Barr, Daniel Cameron are running in this race. Nate Morris, who was previously in the race, who was polling in third, has dropped out of the race after Trump is going to appoint him to a cabinet position or an ambassadorship position of some kind. He has since dropped out and endorsed Andy Barr after President Trump has given his endorsement to Andy Barr in this race as well. As for the polling on the Republican side here, Barr is leading over Daniel Cameron in most of the averages by about 2 points, so it's still a very competitive race. The Emerson College poll from March 29th through 31st, which was the most recent poll. Again, May 1st, Morris dropped out of the race, but Barr was leading 28, Cameron at 21, Morris at 15. So it's going to be interesting to see how this primary shakes out. Andy Barr certainly seems to be the favorite, but this could be a very competitive primary nonetheless. On the Democratic side, several Democrats are running in this race, including some familiar names and past candidates like Charles Booker and like Amy McGrath, who are running in this race, including Pamela Stevenson, the minority leader of the Kentucky House of Representatives. For the polling in this run, the race to the White House average has Charles Booker actually leading by 17.6% at 35.7%, Amy McGrath polling in second at 18.1%. So Charles Booker seems to be the likely Democratic candidate right now, but this primary has to play out as well. It's listed as solid Republican across the board for the rankings. For the most recent poll from Public Policy Polling from December, Andy Barr is leading Charles Booker by roughly about 9 points or so there, or 11 points. Yes, by 11 points in the most recent poll, so that is likely Republican. For Cameron versus Booker, it's 7 points. For Nate Morris versus Booker, it'd only be 1 point. So for this poll, we're going to go off these rankings and put Kentucky into the likely Republican ranking, as an 11-point lead would fall under that likely rating. Okay, so we're going to go to the state of Florida, where Republican incumbent Ashley Moody, who is the Florida Attorney General, was appointed by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis to fill the rest of the term of Marco Rubio, who is now the Secretary of State for President Trump in his second term. She'll be the Republican nominee in this race. There are some candidates running, but she should have no problem there. On the Democratic side, Two Democrats are running in Alex Vindman and Angie Nixon. Alex Vindman seems to be the leading candidate at this current point in time to be the candidate. For independents, there's an independent candidate in the race. As for the rankings, it's solid Republican from 2 out of the 4 rankings, likely Republican from Sabato, and Race to the White House has it as lead. For the most recent poll from Stetson University, Ashley Moody is leading 51 to 38, but that same Stetson University poll has Moody leading over Vindman 49 to 42, only a 7-point lead in this race. All the talk online has been that Vindman is most likely Democratic candidate, so with that rankings and with that poll, we'd actually put Florida into the likely Republican category to start off for 2026, on this polling video. So that's the state of Florida. Now we can go to the state of Georgia. Georgia is talked about as one of the most premier battleground Senate seats of 2026. This is Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff won a very close election in 2020. He'll obviously be the Democratic Senate candidate again. The Republican primary is still up for grabs with U.S. Representatives Buddy Carter, Mike Collins, and first-time candidate and former Tennessee football coach Derek Dooley fighting out this primary. It's looked like for a while Mike Collins has been the leader in this primary, and the polling averages still have Collins at an 11.5% lead for Real Clear Politics and 13.2% for a race to the White House. A poll that just came out a few days ago from Qantas Insights shows Collins at 33%, but Derek Dooley now in second place at 23%, Buddy Carter in third at 14% with 27% still undecided. So if that poll is true and ends up reflecting the election environment here, there's still a lot of undecided voters left out there, but Derek Dooley seems to be the candidate that's rising up into second place and not Buddy Carter. So very interesting, but Mike Collins seems to be the Republican leader as of right now, as he really always has been. As for the predictions in this race, 3 out of the 4 have the race favored for the Democrats, lean Democrat from Cook and Sabato, race to the White House as likely. Inside Elections has it as a toss-up. For Ossoff versus Carter, Ossoff's leading by about 3.15%. The most recent poll has him up by about 9%. For Ossoff versus Mike Collins, which is the poll we're going to go off of here, 2.8% for Ossoff, Real Clear Politics, 3.6% for race to the White House, and Ossoff is leading over Mike Collins in the average of the two by 3.2%. All of these, even the average of them, add up to lean Democratic win, so we're going to go with that just to show the Ossoff versus Dooley numbers as well. Ossoff's leading by about 6.75% on that one. But for Ossoff versus Collins, we're going with that 3.2% lead, and Ossoff is winning the Georgia Senate race by a lean Democratic margin on this current map. Now we're going to go to the state of South Carolina. South Carolina, usually, again, a pretty reliably red state. This is Republican incumbent Senator Lindsey Graham, who certainly has his unpopularity issues in this or in the elections as well, but he'll probably win the Republican Senate primary without too much of a problem. On the Democratic side, there are a bunch of candidates running, including Catherine Fleming Bruce, yes, a candidate from 2022 is running as well, but we'll have to wait and see how this ultimately all plays out. Annie Andrews has the endorsement of Jamie Harrison, a past nominee against Lindsey Graham in this race as well. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Annie Andrews is probably the favorite in this race, but again, we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. As for the rankings in this one, it's kind of split between likely Republican and safe Republican for Graham in this race. Lindsey Graham versus Annie Andrews, the most recent poll, shows him leading by 5 points, a likely Republican lead, but more competitive than you might think for a state like South Carolina. So for the state of South Carolina, we're going to give it to the Republican, Lindsey Graham, but only in a likely Republican margin of 5 points, closer to being lean Republican than safe Republican at this current point in time. Now we're going to go to the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, this is probably the most vulnerable Republican seat, or one of the most vulnerable Republican seats in 2026. U.S. Senator Tom Tillis, the Republican incumbent, is not running for re-election. Now, the primaries are already set as the primary election has taken place. Republican RNC Chair Michael Whatley is the Republican candidate. Former Democratic Governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, is the Democratic candidate. And this race is currently listed as lean Democrat by Cook Politico, likely Democrat by race to the White House, and then tossed up by Inside Elections and Sabato's Crystal Ball. As for the polling in this one, though, the polling averages show it very reliably for Roy Cooper right now. With an average of 8.3% lead across all the averages, Cooper is leading this race by a likely Democratic margin in what's supposed to be a very close toss-up type of election. Roy Cooper's off to a very early and very strong lead in this race. Cooper getting around 49%, Whatley just about breaking 40% at 40.7%, still 10.3% leading here. But Cooper is certainly leading and leading by a lot. So with that said, we're going to put North Carolina into the likely Democratic category. Next, we're going to go to the neighboring state of Virginia. Virginia, this is Democratic Senator, I believe, Mark Warner, is up for this election. On the Republican side, 3 Republican candidates are running in Kim Farrington, Ben Mezuzwa, and David Williams. The polling in this one, the only poll that's came out just a few days ago from Bert Mezuzwa is leading over Kim Farrington by about 2 points. So we'll go with that matchup here as the poll for this race from that same poll. Solid Democrat across the board. Mark Warner is winning by over 15 points in all of the matchups for all of the candidates. So no surprise here. Virginia goes into the safe Democratic category. Next to Virginia, we can go to the neighboring state of West Virginia. This is Republican incumbent Shelley Moore Capito. Lots of Republicans are running in this race, but Capito should win the primary without too much of a problem. The Democratic side has a lot of Democratic candidates running as well. No polling, but safe Republican from all the prediction rankings. West Virginia goes as safe for the Republicans. Now we're going to the state of Ohio, where Ohio is also becoming one of the closest battlegrounds in the United States. This is a Republican appointed incumbent John Husted, who was appointed to fill the remainder of the term of U.S. Senator J.D. Vance. That's what this special election is for. He was appointed by the governor, Mike DeWine. He'll be the Republican nominee as the primary just took place a few days ago in the state of Ohio, so he's the Republican nominee. Former Democratic Senator of Ohio, Sherrod Brown, is running to try and get a Senate seat back in Ohio. He's the Democratic nominee. It's given a slight edge to the Republican by Inside Elections and Sabado Crystal Ball, toss-up from Cook Politico and Race to the White House. The most recent polling averages show John Husted leading by a decently small amount of roughly about 3 points across the board, ranging from 2 points to 4.5, depending on the average that you're looking at, including the most recent poll from the April showing Husted up over Brown by about 3 points. So a very competitive race, but one that John Husted is currently leading over Sherrod Brown by roughly about 3%. So with that said, Ohio on the Senate map starts out as lean for the Republicans. Now we're going to go to the state of Michigan, where Michigan is a really, really interesting one, because depending on which Democratic candidate ends up being the candidate, the polling is showing very different things. On the Democratic side, most important to know is the incumbent U.S. Senator Gary Peters is not running for another term, and it is an open race. The Democratic primary is very split and very competitive between Haley Stevens, Mallory McMorrow, and Abdul El-Sayed. Now, the polling recently shows Abdul El-Sayed actually taking a lead in the polling averages of roughly about 2 points or so across the board here, but still a ton of undecided vote left. Now, most recent poll from the Glenn Garrett Group, which is sponsored by the Detroit Regional Chamber, and Emerson College poll from back in April show a very close race tied between Abdul El-Sayed and Mallory McMorrow, and Haley Stevens leading in this race by about 2 points. So this Democratic primary is certainly very, very close and really can go to any of the candidates at this current point in time. Abdul El-Sayed is the leader on the Democratic primary right now, so we're going to go with him as the candidate, but I'm going to show you why that's a very important distinction as of right now. On the Republican side, the U.S. Senate nominee from 2024, Mike Rogers, is running again, and he'll be the Republican candidate. As for the general toss-up from all the predictions except for the Democrats for race to the White House, and this is how the matchups break out. If it's Haley Stevens versus Mike Rogers, Stevens leads over Rogers by roughly about 1.9% across all the averages in this race. For Abdul El-Sayed versus Mike Rogers actually leads by 3.2% across this race. Now, the Emerson poll from January does show it at a tied race, but still, that's very important considering that same January poll showed Stevens leading over Rogers by about 5 points. And for Rogers versus Mallory McMorrow, Rogers is leading by only 0.8% in this race. And that Emerson poll had McMorrow leading by 3 points over Rogers. So, depending on which Democratic candidate ends up winning as of right now, seems to suggest either a stronger general election opportunity for the Democrats with Haley Stevens and a very competitive one versus Mallory McMorrow, or potentially a weaker one with Abdul El-Sayed based on the current polling. But again, very early on, we're in May, we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But given those polling averages numbers, Michigan right now would go into the lean Republican category for Mike Rogers, as the current polling data for Abdul El-Sayed versus Mike Rogers shows it as lean for the Republicans. So a very fascinating Senate race taking place in the state of Michigan. Next, we're going to go to the state of Delaware. Delaware obviously not expected to be too competitive of a Senate race. This should be safe for the Democrats. Democratic U.S. Senator Chris Coons has filed to run again. Republican Michael Katz and John Shawley are running in that race. Solid Democrat. Again, no surprise here. Delaware we can put into the safe Democratic category. Now we can go to the state of New Jersey. New Jersey, this is going to be Democratic incumbent Cory Booker. On the Republican side, candidates that are running, there are 4 candidates currently in this race. But in terms of the general election, should not be very competitive. Safe Democrat across the board. New Jersey goes safe Democrat. Next, we're going to go to the state of Rhode Island, where Rhode Island, this is Democratic incumbent U.S. Senator Jack Reed. And again, this is not a race that's expected to be too competitive as well. Jack Reed will win the Democratic primary. The Republican Raymond McKay is the only candidate in the race. Solid Democrat across the board. The most recent poll for Reed versus McKay came from the University of New Hampshire towards the middle of April, with Jack Reed leading over Raymond McKay by roughly around 20 points. So no surprise here, Rhode Island goes in the safe Democratic category. Now we can go to the state of Massachusetts. This is going to be U.S. Democratic Senator Ed Markey. Now this is going to be interesting on the Democratic side, as Markey is getting a primary challenge from U.S. Representative Seth Moulton. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye out for. Though in the early polling data thus far, Markey is leading Seth Moulton by a very considerable amount, roughly about 15 points between Markey and Moulton in the polling averages thus far. The Republican side, former U.S. Senator nominee in 2024, John Deaton, won the primary then. He is going to be the Republican nominee again. After the general, though, it's going to be solid Democrat across the board. The most recent poll from Markey versus John Deaton shows Markey leading over Deaton from the University of New Hampshire poll by over 20 points. So this is going to be safe Democrat in Massachusetts, as not really much of a surprise. Now, with that said, the cursor is being a little slow here in reacting, but it'll fill in 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so Massachusetts, safe Democrat. Now we have 2 more Senate seats in New England and New Hampshire and Maine, both of which are actually showing to be a lot more competitive this cycle than in past cycles. So Maine won't make a lot of sense, but still, we're going to start with the state of New Hampshire, where this is the Senate seat currently held by Democratic incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Now, the primaries on this one are interesting. The Democratic side, Chris Pappas, U.S. Representative of the 1st District, will be the Democratic nominee. Not really too much of a surprise there. On the Republican side, 2 former U.S. Senators are running. John E. Sununu, the former U.S. Senator of New Hampshire, who lost to Jeanne Shaheen in 2008 but beat her in 2002. He's running in this race. Former Massachusetts U.S. Senator and 2014 New Hampshire Senate nominee Scott Brown is also running. Now, the polling data for this one, the averages all show Sununu leading over Scott Brown by a considerable amount, roughly 30 points across the averages of the 2. So it looks like Sununu will be the Republican nominee. As for the general election, this is a race that's nearly in the Democratic favor, but a very competitive one, it seems, lean Democrat across the board, except for Inside Elections, who has it as tilt. For Pappas versus Brown, Pappas is leading by around 10.8% across all the averages. For Pappas versus Sununu, a more competitive race, with the averages ranging from 3.7% from Real Clear Politics to 5.5% for Race to the White House. The average of the averages is Pappas up 4.4%. With the most recent poll coming from University of New Hampshire from April, showing Pappas leading Sununu by about 7 points. The prior poll from Emerson showing it only a 1-point lead. So this is a Senate race that Pappas seems to be leading over Sununu, but this is expected to be the most competitive Senate race in the state of New Hampshire in quite some time, going back to the 2016 Senate race of Kelly Ayotte versus Maggie Hassan. The 2020 and 2022 Senate races will likely not be as competitive as this one is shaping up to be. Still, a 4.4% lead for Chris Pappas. New Hampshire goes into the lean Democratic category for now. This puts the Democrats at 50 Senate seats, 1 Senate seat remaining in the state of Maine, where Maine, we just recently got some clarity on the Senate race as who the candidates are going to be. Republican incumbent Susan Collins is running again in this race. She's the presumptive nominee. On the Democratic side, it was a primary between Graham Plattner, a Sullivan Harbor master, someone that's been very popular with a lot of Democrats online, a lot of younger Democrats as well. For a while, he was facing off against the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, though she just recently dropped out of the race, so now Plattner is going to be the Democratic candidate, and that primary is all locked up. As for the polling, this one's going to be very interesting to keep an eye out for. Inside Elections has it tilt Republican, Click Politico has it toss-up, as well as Salvador's Crystal Ball. The Economist and the Race to the White House have it favored for Plattner. Now, the polling shows Graham Plattner actually in a very strong position, with the average of all the averages, Plattner's leading over Susan Collins by 6.8%. At 48.2, Collins at 41.4, still 10.4% undecided. Maine does utilize ranked choice voting, so the winning candidate has to break 50% of the vote, but Graham Plattner is currently leading Susan Collins, and by a very large amount. Though people who took an eye on the Senate race in 2020 will tell you that a Democrat leading in the polls against Susan Collins heading into the race does not guarantee victory. Still, this is good news for Graham Plattner that he's up by 6.8%. So the final state on the Senate map and the most recent polling data gives the state of Maine as likely Democrat. That means going off the latest polling averages and latest polls in every single one of these Senate races, with a very wonky looking map, Democrats currently are favored to win 61 Senate seats, Republicans currently favored to win 49. With some very interesting calls here, you see Maine is likely Democrat, North Carolina likely Democrat, Texas likely Democrat, Alaska and Georgia as lean Democrat, and Iowa as tilt for the Democrats. On the Republican side, you see lean Republican Ohio, lean Republican Michigan, tilt Republican in Nebraska, lean Republican Mississippi, and then you have likely Republican in Florida, South Carolina, Kansas, Idaho, and Montana. It's a very interesting looking map. I would bet almost anything come November of 2026, the Senate map is probably not going to look like this, and the margin results especially are not going to look like this, but it's a very interesting video, very interesting topic. I hope you enjoyed it. Certainly on the longer side for this video, but I hope you did enjoy. Make sure to like and subscribe, and leave any comments down below what you think of the 2026 Senate elections and anything that pertains to this video. Do all of that. For now, that is it. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video.